Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are, whenever you're watching this. Very welcome to today, this afternoon, this evening's episode of Freethought Hour. You might notice a few different things. Number one, John is not here. Number two, we have electricity in South Africa, and I just switched on the light. Number three, it's daytime where I am. So John has other very important responsibilities, and he asked me to take the steering wheel. I have no idea how this is going to go, but I do know that we have a very interesting guest. It's a fellow South African, so I suppose tonight's show could be seen as a coup d'etat of Freethought Hour. Jan Havenga is our guest. He is based in Eiserfontein, and like all South Africans, we are very, very strict about our priorities, and that's one of the reasons this is a pre-recorded show, because tonight at 9 o'clock, the Springboks, that's the South African national rugby team, play. It is also a warm-up for the coming World Cup, and Jan has to watch that match, and therefore he asked me to do a pre-recorded episode. Both of us are settled in with the necessary refreshments. I think Jan has a good glass of scotch with him, just to keep Highland Park scotch. And with that, I'm going to begin and jump right into it and ask Jan to is today, and also what his areas of speciality are, because Jan is a very interesting man. He's a man boy because he still plays with model trains, but that's all part of his job. So Jan is a regular on television and radio. He works in logistics and transport, and he's an expert in many fields. He's worked abroad in numerous countries, and I hope he will tell us about that. So Jan, welcome to Freethought Hour. Pleased to meet you for the third or fourth time that you and I have been talking virtually. And thank you for regaling us with an hour of your time. I hope you'll enjoy it as much as I know I'm going to enjoy it. So, how did you become the person you are today?
Thanks. Thank you for the opportunity to talk to you. It sounds very interesting. I think I'm probably a much, much more boring person than you think, but it doesn't matter. We all do what we can. How did I become what I am? This is maybe through some mistakes I made in my life. One of them, at school already, I had scored full marks for my ability to work with numbers, to work with science, etc. But sadly, due to certain events, I went to university and studied theology. So I studied theology at university. Yeah.
Okay, hang on. I'm sorry, I have to interrupt you there.
You're welcome.
How does one go from scoring full marks in science and maths, and then what made you decide to study theology?
No, it's the typical thing that we all know. I come at a very difficult background, really, really difficult. I won't go into it. I don't mind doing. That's something I've learned in rehabilitation. Is that one mustn't mind talking about the past, but it's not important now. And then you have some sort of a event in your life that you think you are now a new person and you've been born again, and that whole story. You know what type of events I talk about. We know that it is basically just certain parts of your brain that overreacts to certain things and certain stimuli. But at that moment in my life, when I was at grade 12, I made a decision born out of a belief that this is what I should do. So I went and studied theology for 3 years. I got my baccalaureate degree, the first degree. I did an honors in strategic science then, because the moment I got to my third year and I got my degree, I realized this is a huge, huge mistake. I do not fit into this community. These people are more or less, all of them, at one level of crazy. So I just went and did a simple job at the railways, just to have something to do before my 2 years of army service, our national army service that we're supposed to do. Thereafter, I just worked myself up in Transnet. which is South Africa's big company that owns all ports, operates all ports, owns all railways, operates all railways, etc. At that stage, it was a really big company, one of the 10 biggest in South Africa. It's now been worn down a lot. But I just did that then because I couldn't definitely not become some sort of a preacher or pastor or anything like that. But that's the only degree I had. So while I was at Transnet, I studied MBL. And of course, that's sort of a next step if you don't have any knowledge about at that stage. And after I've done my MBL, I started doing BCom subjects like accountancy 1, 2, and 3. I did audit science, etc. But in that process, I got seriously involved in some really big and interesting things in this country. So I enjoyed that a lot. And eventually, when I was 50 years old, I decided I'll do a PhD. So I did my PhD. I wrote it in 4 months because I had all the research in place. And then I started doing serious research around the world, which was a fantastic opportunity. And finally just became a professor, and I'm now emeritus professor. So,
okay.
Yeah, so it comes from a mistake.
I'm so sorry. Oops, there I did it again. I just did it again. This is a family show. I'm sorry about that. I wanted to mute the screen because I've still got a little bit of I don't know if it's a second COVID or something. So I wanted to mute the screen. So for those that just saw something they might never forget and have nightmares.
I saw nothing, so I don't know what anybody else saw.
You'll just have to go with my coughing. But so firstly, I want to ask, how many languages can you speak now? Because if you study theology in South Africa, you do Hebrew, you do Aramaic. Do you do Latin when you study? So
no,
not Latin.
Luckily not. Luckily not. And I don't have a language. I don't have a language ability. I never, in terms of vocational tests, etc. I never did well in languages. But at school already, I realized that you waste your time at school, apart from maths and science. So I didn't study things like geography because I can look at the globe myself, and I didn't study history because anyway, in those days in South Africa, history wasn't the truth. It was just a view of some white nationalists about the past. They didn't see the past as it is. I studied German. So I studied German at school, and I still use my German, which I'm very proud of. I just come back from Germany about 2 weeks ago. I can still get along with that. And then, yes, you're right. Then you have to do Greek and Hebrew at university for 2 years. And the Greek especially is very difficult. It's not easy, but I did my Greek and I did my Hebrew, but you can't speak it. It's not.
Does ancient Greek help one at all in the real world? Is it very different from modern Greek?
It is in many respects different. It's many respects different. If you think about it, how different Dutch and Afrikaans is. And I mean, the split between Dutch and Afrikaans was in 1925 that Afrikaans became an official language of this country. And now if you put them next to each other, they're hugely different. In fact, about 25% different. Now, Hellenistic Greek, which is the Greek we're talking about, not ancient Greek, because the New Testament was written in Hellenistic Greek, which is it's already different than ancient Greek. That's 1800, 1700 years ago. So yes, it's very, very different. But if I go to Greece, I do recognize words and I can spell the letters. And I can read many of the words stay the same. And Greek is a very interesting language. I mean, give you an example, the Greek word for a horse is hippos. And the Greek word for a river is potamos. So horse of the river, because hippos potamos became hippopotamus. And it's like that. A lot of these things you pick up. Strategos is the Greek word for strategy.
In your scientific... Oh, I'm sorry, we have a lag. We'll just have to work around that. Did you find that it helped you in your studies? So I know you work a lot in logistics. Am I right?
Yes, that's right. Yes.
So what exactly was the topic of your PhD? Was it theoretical? Was it practical? Is there something as theoretical logistics? And I'm asking because I think logistics is in essence a very practical application of theoretical ideas. Am I right? I know nothing about logistics.
It's actually very easy to explain for me. I've done it often, but to give a step back, my PhD, which I wrote in 2007, I use on a daily basis in my life. All the principles and the ideas of my PhD, it's a living document in my life. And the 58 countries in the world that I visited, working for the World Bank, the logistics models that I've developed in India, in Uzbekistan, in Mongolia, all places I've been to often. I've been 15 times to India, the Horn of Africa, and then obviously over the last 25 years in South Africa is all based on research in my. So I see my PhD is not sort of some tick that I wanted to do, but it's an intrinsic part of my life. Intrinsic part of my life. And to explain it, there's a little story. I tell the story to students. I don't give a pre-graduate class anymore, but I tell the stories to the students so that they can understand. And that's a story of a diamond mine in the northwestern corner of South Africa, in Alexander Bay. There's a mine there. This mine, they mine for diamonds. And these days, it's not on the sand anymore. It's in the sea. So they have this horde of little ships that basically suck the gravel out of the seabed. And then they wash it and they find diamonds in this. And they use a massive amount of fuel every year to do this. So once a year, they have a bunker facility for fuel. And once a year, they get a delivery of fuel. And a ship comes to deliver the fuel. And at that stage, many years ago when this happened, and it's a true story, that fuel cost, the delivery was 10 cents a liter. That's what it cost. So this bunkering facility became quite old, and they were thinking about renewal. So a friend of mine at that stage, who was a joint managing director of Cargo Carriers, a road operating company, he went to them and he made them an offer. Remember, they were paying 10 cents a liter for the delivery. He made them an offer of doing it for them for 50 cents a liter by road. 5 times more. If you do the calculation, it is cheaper. It's very simple. You get a daily delivery. Therefore, you don't have to take a big bank loan in the beginning of the year. You only pay for the fuel as you use it. So there's a saving. That's what logistics work with. You're talking about the opportunity cost of money. You don't need a kind of money all up front. That whole huge bunkering facility they had, they only now needed a small tank, because every day 2 trucks will come and leave 100,000 liters of fuel, and they use it by the next day. So it's a smaller bunkering facility. And so you can go on. So if you put all of these processes together, what we call the total cost of ownership, the cost of having the fuel available, put all of them together. Some might be more, some might be less, and you map out that whole system, and you then decide what to do. So in this case, 5 times more paying for the transport actually made the whole process of having fuel cheaper. And what logisticians done is do that type of calculations for businesses. And it becomes very complex and very interesting. I really enjoy it, but I've never done that for businesses. I do that for countries. So I would develop a model for all of South Africa. I've got one that's 25 years old now. It was recently used by the presidency of South Africa in the work that I'm doing there to try and realign the logistic systems of the country. So I do this for countries. I have a team, and we do all the flow modeling and activities of logistics for the whole country for a year. And in the case for South Africa, 30-year forecast. So once we know how everything flows, where it starts, where it ends, what it needs, what is cheapest, where capacity is required, we can use this model and we can do this trade-off for the whole country. What is the cheapest inputs to get the maximum gross domestic product out of the system? And we do that for all countries where we come to. We've got a model for India, we've got a model for Uzbekistan, we've got one for Mongolia, we've got one for the Middle East and Northeast and Middle East and North Africa countries, all the way from Algeria to Iraq and Iran. We have a model that we nearly finished with the whole of Africa. We've got one for Sub-Saharan Africa, for the city of Kolkata. We've got one for the Western Cape and one for all of South Africa. We've got many of them. And that was fantastic. And we really enjoy it. We have written the first book about macro logistics, that's what we call it. It was published 2 years ago. It was peer-reviewed. We are, I have to say, in the developing world, we are basically the only people that can do country-level freight flow modeling and logistics planning. And therefore, that's also one of the reasons when the president announced in SONA this year, in its State of the Nation address, he said the roadmap will be delivered for logistics for South Africa, will be developed. I'm one of 4 people that's working on that roadmap in the presidency, trying to revive fixed Transnet, doing all of those things, using those models. So yeah, it's a fun time for me, except for the last 8 months, I've worked harder than ever before in my life, even though I'm formally retired from the university. And I'm talking a lot.
No, it's fascinating to listen to you. I just want to say, the concept of retirement, in my opinion, is actually not a very healthy one, because when people retire, they stop producing, and when one stops producing, one tends to stop leading a productive life. And productive lives, people who don't lead productive lives, to keep working is something that I think I get a little bit more relaxed. But this idea that people retire and stop working is actually quite a modern Western idea. I know that in the Eastern philosophy, you just don't stop working, because work is actually something good. It's not something something bad. And I tend to agree with that, because people who stop working, they tend that keeps working are very active and healthy until they are advanced in age. People who retire and sit on the stoop all day and do nothing, they tend to be depressed and they tend to die unnecessarily early. So that's about retirement. So Jan, and that's if one enjoys what one's doing and is productive, go for it. And of course, then the benefits that people reap. I want to ask you about this whole idea of logistics and transport. So one of the reasons that I have to run the show alone today is because there's currently a rail workers' strike in the UK, where John is based, which happened. And so last year, we spent, my son and I, at the kind behest of my parents, spent 3 weeks in the UK visiting my brother who lives in Yorkshire, in Pontefract. And we use a lot of rail transport. And people are always talking about how efficient the United Kingdom and European rail systems are. But I was actually, I was struck by, especially the more rural trains and the longer distance trains, how empty those cars were. There were times when my son and I were traveling between Yorkshire and Manchester, for example, or Yorkshire and Leeds. We were literally the only people in a car. And then we also spent a lot of time walking, you know, in the little villages and so. And I noticed that even where my brother lived, most families have 2 cars.
Yes, so I've got quite a few. There's a lag. That's why
yes.
I'm interrupting you. Yeah.
No,
I've got quite a few. Yeah, quite a few thoughts about what you saying just now. I'm on this side where I start chronologically from where you started to talk at the end, but just about trains being empty. Very interesting. I once, for instance, I've done trips to Europe where I've caught 40 to 50 trains. I've trained from Gibraltar to Tromsø to see the midnight light. Many trains stayed over and so on. I love European trains. And I remember once from Lucerne to, I caught a train from Lucerne to Milan, basically, on a Sunday morning at 10 o'clock. And I was the only guy in the train. But every hour there's a train. The trick there is, if the Swiss provide the train that connects the whole country, and you always know you can get a train, then you don't buy a car or you don't use your car much. That's the thing. Is when you get companies, I nearly said a name, like big consulting companies, and I say, oh no, let's take those empty trains out of the system and we're more efficient and so on. Then people start to say, but what if I want to get somewhere? And like in the Netherlands, because you can get everywhere without a car. The moment you can't get everywhere with a car, you buy a car. It's as simple as that. just about retirement. The university is a fantastic place to retire from. That is the most amazing thing. I don't know if you know, but in my case, I still have a little office at the university. I get full IT support. I keep my email address for the rest of my life. I've got a personal librarian. I still have 3 PhD students. Universities cherish their tenured professors that retire. They look after us. They keep us involved. They keep us involved in research and all of those things. The only thing that actually changed for me, I don't do pre-graduate classes anymore. The rest of the time, I still feel I'm part of the university. And but the work that I've done over the last 8 or 9 months were too much. But the sad problem about this is, that's not a sad problem. This is an interesting problem. This is like an operation that I'm busy with. And I struggle to explain that to people. If you're a doctor and you work too hard, let's say you're a GP, then what you do is you just don't take on new patients. And over time, you reduce your patient load. But what I'm busy with in South Africa, we've got a few other projects as well. But I mostly spend my time at the moment is one big operation. One big operation. I'm standing there with the scalpel together with other people. The patient, which is South Africa's logistics system, is in front of us. And you can't walk away from it. You have to do from minute to minute and day by day and month by month. Since the president made the announcement, we just have to push through. And we've got a lot of stuff done. And the president has backed us up in this process. And you have to go on until you've done this. So it was too hard. The last 8 months was terrible. 14 hours a day, 6 days a week. I have time for nothing. I stopped watching TV. I stopped reading,
you don't miss
more
much.
or less. That's true. That's very true. But even, I don't read as much as I started under the writer's book because I have to read it because I'm working with trying to fix Transnet. And even that, then sometimes I just don't have time. This week it was past, I flew 4 times.
Sure.
On Monday, I flew to Johannesburg. I came back on Tuesday. And on Wednesday, I flew to Johannesburg again, and I came back on Thursday. So 4 days this week, I was in Joburg, and I had to come back on Tuesday night for all sorts of reasons that we don't have to talk about. So it was just too tough. But
it was just too tough.
Very interesting. I mean, my boss at Operation Vulindlela is Rudy Deeks, and he reports to the president of this country. So he gets a call every Sunday from our president and say, stir your stumps and get this done. And we're working very hard to get it done. And we had a lot done up to now. The detail is not so important, but we're getting there. I'm positive about it. I spoke to this week 2 sets of investors of Transnet, people, or I would say bondholders and creditors at one of the major banks in South Africa. Another one also want me to speak to them to try and give them hope that this is going to work, because the Transnet owes everyone in his auntie a whole truckload of money. So it's hard work, but it's very, very important and interesting. As I've said, been to 58 countries. That is a wonderful opportunity in your life, just to see the world. That is fantastic. That is really, really fun.
I want to ask you to just get back to the story about the British rail strike. And it's often that one hears, I listen to BBC World Radio, and I'll often hear there's a rail strike in France, there's a rail strike here, there's a rail strike there. And I was always taught that built on the railways, because transport, to be able to move things from one place to another fairly quickly and efficiently, is the backbone of trade. And so there's so many things that are, if the people that work in that field are not happy, then obviously going to run, and that's going to have a roll-on impact. And then you have factors like climate change. Like last year, for example, I know that the train tracks got so hot, the railroad tracks, because there's all sort of practical, physical things. The rail tracks in the UK are built to withstand certain temperature parameters, and now because of climate change, which contrary to popular belief, well, not popular belief, but contrary to what some people think, I believe climate change is real, and I think it's having an impact, and I think that you would agree with me. Now, all those things, we think that these things are far away and it has no impact on me? I mean, I'm sitting in Worcester in South Africa. So what does it matter when there's a drought and the Panama Canal can't take the same number of ships that it normally does because there's not enough water to get the locks going? What would you say is the most physical effect that you've seen that logistics has on the lives of ordinary people, ordinary folk like me, who sit in a small town like Worcester?
The effect of what is wrong in this country at the moment and what is wrong with Transnet and with logistics, we do lots of research. We publish a lot of it. We presented some of our research that got to do with this topic and about sustainability and a global network we work with at the moment to what we call decarbonized logistics. We work with that a lot. And you'll be maybe surprised to know or not, is the effect on the gross domestic product of South Africa is worse due to our logistics problem than our energy problem. It's worse. Hundreds of thousands of jobs is being lost. A lot of things happen. The difference is if you have problems with your electricity supplier and you throw the light switch, the lights are either on or not. With logistics, it's a very, very slow decline over time. Last year, it cost us 7% of GDP. In fact, if the Transnet and Eskom worked exactly the way they should, our GDP last year would have been 13 or 14% higher. That is the massive amount of growth that we are throwing away because this is not working. It's just more hidden, but it's terrible. I can give you just one practical example that's very, very easy to explain. So we've got a coal export line that runs from the coal fields to Richards Bay. The only way in which you can transport this in bulk, you can't put it on trucks, and they do, is by a railway system that we developed that's been certified by the Heavy Haul Association many years ago as one of the best in the world, that railway system. It transports about 75 million tons of coal per year. Last year, we transported 50. So 25 million tons is gone. Now, that 25 million tons last year sold at 5,000 Rand a ton. Because of the Ukraine war, coal became very, very expensive. And especially places like Europe and so on, you know all about energy and how expensive it is. 25 million tons of coal did not get exported. At 5,000 Rand a ton is 125 billion Rand. The tax on that's lost in the government coffers is so much. But now you must think, what happens now, the heaps at the mines are full. You know, they can't mine anymore. The mines are working efficiently because the railway can't move it away. So now what happens, they start closing shafts. They've closed shafts, 1,000 people lost their job here, 1,000 people lost their job there. Now, when they've closed the shaft, all the local, the butchery and the bakery and the spar and all of those things go out of business. Now, because they close the shaft, all the stuff that they buy, the fuel, the food, the stuff that they buy to actually run the mine, the locks, the timber, and so on, they don't buy anymore. Therefore, all those people lose their jobs. Then that 100 billion that I'm talking about actually works out to nearly 400 billion Rand that this country lost last year. And eventually, we will all feel it. We'll feel it in unrest. We feel it in people who's hungry. We will feel it in people that hasn't got jobs, people that then start, and we believe that we are very close to a civil war if we can't get this fixed. If we can't get Eskom and Transnet fixed, we see the signs of a possible civil war. So this is so critical. So in your case, personally, you will not feel it immediately, but you will feel the effects of that, and it will be worse than not having power. It will be lots of worse things that will happen, which is quite bad.
And that goes for every single country in the world. I mean, even advanced first world countries like America or the United Kingdom, if they do not work on their logistics infrastructure, potentially the same could happen. Already I've seen, as I watch things on YouTube, and I know that's not research, but I do try to watch good documentaries published by PBS Nova or Deutsche World. And it seems that already even in America, there's a big shift from railways to trucking. And that has a totally different impact on the environment and a totally different impact on people's lives. And I think you're still the funny. Listen to that. That's a classic Spoonerism. Your field of study, your field of study logistics is it's almost it's very much under the radar, and it seems very staid and not exciting at all. I mean, being an archaeologist and digging up lost treasure seems exciting. Well, is exciting, but being somebody who does calculations about how many tons of this is transported where to and by whom and at what cost, eventually, because money makes the world go round, it boils down to the pockets of regular folk like you and I. Would you be able to tell us a little bit about your work in places like India and Uzbekistan, because and your travels across the world, and the interesting people that you've worked with and working for the World Bank? Is the World Bank a cabal of baby-eating Freemasons?
Well, our country has got shares in the World Bank, so I wonder. No, what happened after the Second World War? Two institutions were created: the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. And the World Bank's name is actually the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development. The World Bank's single mission is to eradicate poverty. This is what it's about. Countries, given their size, are all shareholders in the World Bank. Therefore, South Africa also has a small shareholding. They have a board that meet. They are probably the biggest bank in the world. I've been to their headquarters in Washington. It's just a stone's throw away from the president, from the White House. It is a massive, massive organization. The STCs, I'm one. So STC means you can work 150 days a year. And at the moment, I use up all 150 days per year working for the World Bank. I think there's more 120,000 of us. But even then, we have a speciality that is very, very unique. So we're just busy all the time. It is not what you say, but there's a big but. Many of the World Bank managers that I've worked with is not as focused as the one that I have. Not as clever, not as dedicated, not as understanding what the World Bank is about. And that is to change the lives of people to the good. My own manager of the World Bank is the most fantastic, interesting guy that you can think of. His name is Bernard Aratua. Born in Uganda. He's dad at many wives. He's got more than 100 brothers and sisters. He's got a PhD in civil engineering. When they were 5 years old, they moved to the UK. So he's now a UK citizen. He's a subject of the king. But he has worked in many, many, many countries in the world. And he's a fantastic guy, extremely clever. He's one of the most clever and pleasant people I've ever worked with. And I've probably been about 30, 40 missions with him. A mission is what they describe. If you go to a country, you spend a week, do a lot of work and go home again. That's a mission. I've been on tens and dozens of missions with him. And he's the most fantastic guy to work with. He's the cleverest boss I've ever had. And if you're a South African, excuse me for saying it, a black man from Uganda, the best guy I ever worked for. I really enjoy his company. Yeah.
I must, you're touching upon something that I didn't initially think would be part of our discussion, but that's racism. And, South Africa used to be a country built on racial beliefs and along racial lines. But we did have a number of important mentors, the United Kingdom. I think my mom used to say, her father used to say, the Brits invented racism. South Africa just perfected it.
You'll be surprised. You'll be surprised about where you get racism. So let me tell you one interesting story about Bernard, who I said is my boss at the World Bank. Fantastic guy. I really enjoy his company. But I've been to India 15 times. Every one of those 15 missions I've been with Bernard. And if you want to see racism, you must see it from Indians to black people. If you arrive in India, you have European privilege if you look like me. You just get treated well. I don't know why it is, but Indians treat Europeans extremely well. I took my wife with me on one of those missions, and she had a guy on a tuk-tuk every day while I was working. I was never scared for a life or a livelihood or anything. Bernard, though, Now, I looked at the YouTube video again yesterday because he's a senior guy in the World Bank where one of the ministers of one of the states of India called him the N-word and said, we don't need the N-word person from America that was a slave to come and tell us what to do. He said that on live TV. He had to apologize to World Bank, all that kind of gets his head. Bernard and myself, we once arrived in Delhi on a flight from Varanasi in Delhi. And the Imperial Hotel, which is the most fantastic hotel in the world, built in a 150-year-old fort. We always stay there if we go to Delhi. They always send a driver with a Land Rover and nice little wet towels and water and so on to come and fetch you at the airport. Sadly, Bernard booked that hotel, that driver on his name. We didn't book it on my name. So we arrived in the parking lot. And the driver, I'm talking about 2017, the driver refused to take us. You just look at Bernard and say, this is not possible that a black man is going to I promise you.
Hotel. I mean
and sometimes when I walk through customs, when we arrive in India, I often just go and sit on the other side and just wait because I know Bernard's going to be about an hour. He gets interrogated, he gets asked questions, people want to know about him, where are you coming from, what on earth is going on here? But at the same time, I've got a friend, her name is Covendry Moodley, very, very good friend of mine. She worked for me for many years. Clever woman. Really a clever woman. Hardworking, dedicated. I once took her with to when I visited my friends in Bristol. I have two lady friends who are married, who live in Bristol. Fantastic, two fantastic girls. I really, really like spending time with them. I took them in with. And the same thing happened at Heathrow. I had to wait for her for a few hours on the other side because she got interrogated. The African passport, walking through customs, Indian girl, what on earth are you doing here? I promise you, this was the UK, and this was about 2009, 2010. So yes, racism is a terrible thing. It's a terrible thing in our country, and I understand white privilege. I understand it very well, and people get cross with me if I talk about it. I was in a very poor family. I had a difficult childhood. We had no money, nothing. But you know what? My age, I went to a fantastic school. All my books, everything, all the stationery was completely free. I was able to go all the way to grade 12 without my parents having to spend a cent on my schooling. I had German. I had a fantastic maths teacher, all of those things. I then could get enough money together with bursaries and stuff to go to university. I was absolutely assured of a job when I finished studying. If you were a white male in South Africa in the 70s, you will get a job. You get issued by a job. That's it. So that is white privilege to the nth degree. And I understand that. When I was at university and I was a lecturer and I had people I had to help. I remember one white guy that went through really problems in his life. And he said, now I must help him in the exam and just put him through. I said, I can't. Imagine you have to have a heart operation and they push you in this gurney there into the operating theater. And you hear the one nurse say to the other nurse, oh yeah, by the way, this is the doctor. Eh? He had difficulties that he couldn't help at university. So they just put him through. You don't want to hear that. But there's a big difference. I had many students in my class that definitely struggled with certain concepts and so on. That comes out of previously disadvantaged communities. And then I'm willing to put in a huge amount of effort. I feel that is my duty in terms of this. They have to pass the exam. That's just a different thing. But you have to understand that we come out of an extremely, extremely privileged background. If you're still my age, and many of my people that I work with don't understand that. And even the younger people don't understand it because this thing is generational. I mean, my one partner is 40 years old. So clearly he was born very, very close to when Mandela was released from prison. He struggles to understand, but he still had privileges that was handed down to him from his parents. So I understand this. Even worse than that, and this is something that Bernard has taught me, sometimes we also have to be more tolerant with governments that's going astray. I once said it, and people were extremely cross with me. I said the problems we have in leadership at the moment in government in South Africa was caused by the architect of apartheid in 1955, when he said in Parliament of South Africa, you can go and look it up, we said that black people is not worth teaching anything. So we had a schooling system on that side where people were not taught skills. They know, and I know for a fact there is nothing like a racial difference between people's ability. There's nothing. It just does not exist. There is what you've been taught, and it's the skills that you've got. And that privilege just goes on and on and on. And so the problems, you have to be a little bit more, and I know this now because I work with government all the time. I work with ministers. I talk to them. I work on these plans that we're working on. We're working very, very hard. And sometimes you just have to be tolerant because people have now got power that they didn't have before. They had no say in what happens in this country. They had no real freedoms. They had no real training. So they're going to make mistakes. And somehow my ancestors is also responsible for those mistakes. So just be a bit more patient. Just be a bit more patient. And I've learned that. And it's an important point in my life. That patience. It does sometimes drive you crazy, but what can you do? You need to work around that, and you need to get the place fixed. It's just so simple.
So the philosophy of Stoicism really interests me, and what you're talking about, that patience, I think it touches upon being stoic and changing the things that you can, and the things that you can't change. Try to change your response to it, because ultimately that can be done. Jan, I want to ask you a little bit about climate change. And are you, from a logistics point of view, are you worried about it? Do you think it's real? Do you think it's man-made? I know this is probably not your field of study, but I'm so sorry. But I suspect
it actually, it actually is. It actually is to a vast extent, and the UK plays a major role in this. So my mentor, I've appointed him as a mentor. I'm going to visit him one of these days again. He's a Scot. He's Professor Alan McKinnon. Alan McKinnon is from Heriot-Watt University, and he is probably the global spokesperson for the decarbonization of logistics. That's what we call it. So we have a study group globally. It's run by him and with Professor David Sabon. David Sabon is a mechanical engineer from Cambridge. So every year in December, we have a big meeting in Cambridge where we share all our ideas about the decarbonization of logistics. We have a conference, we have what we call a family meeting, and we work extremely hard on a country level to do what we call decarbonization of logistics.
Jan,
the UK is, yeah.
Sorry, aren't you just being woke to have family meetings where you talk about decarbonizing logistics? I mean, are you a woke guy? And is your mentor? I mean, really?
Well, Alan McKinnon.
Of course, I'm being very sarcastic.
Yeah. No, I know. Alan McKinnon himself is a very interesting guy. I wasn't thinking I'm going to say this. He's also a wonderful person. I'm going to visit him at his house. Me and my wife, he spent some time here as well. He's very well known in logistics. He's one of the elders of our. But now, if you talk about work, he votes for Labour. So obviously, he didn't like Margaret Thatcher. You know, he was completely against Scotland leaving the Union. Completely against that. He had massive fights with government in the UK about Brexit. He wrote so much. He told people about what's going to happen, and every one of his predictions came true. But,
and he's still busy coming through, I suppose.
Yeah, and the reason why I'm referring to that now, I spoke to Alan last July when I caught one of those trains from Bristol to Edinburgh that had problems because of the buckling of the rails and the catenary system. And he said if there was a vote now for independent Scotland, he will vote for the independent Scotland. This is how far the UK's, I would say, the conservative South have driven Britain. So yeah, if you talk about wokeism, I'm becoming a socialist more and more every day. I can see the progression in my life. These days I am extremely socialism driven in my life, in what I believe. And that's it. So I suppose I'm very woke. And I always give people the 5 rules of socialism. Rule 1 is high taxes. Rule 2, wisely spent, the high taxes. Rule 3, always free medical. I don't want to see people die because they haven't got money. Always free education, because then you have the opportunity to create wealth in the future. And the fifth one, don't take people's stuff away, except when they die. Then you can have higher state duties. And if you live by those 5 rules, you have a Germany, you have a Netherlands, you have a Finland, you have all 5 of those things are true in those countries. And the people are happy. It works. It's the happiest countries in the world. Then people say, oh, socialism. What about Venezuela? Well, Venezuela didn't do the 5 rules.
No, they didn't.
They didn't. They took people's stuff away. They did this and this. But if you follow the 5 rules, I am a socialist all the way. So then I suppose I'm super woke. Super woke.
Jan, and maybe this is a topic for an economist, but I'm more and more beginning to think that one cannot do logistics without looking at all the subjects that you didn't like so much at school. You said you didn't like history. Now, history plays an important part because, the war in Ukraine is based in history. In fact, the whole of the modern world.
Now, I love history. Sorry.
Now you do. You've grown up. At school, you didn't.
No. I did not like the type of history that was taught.
Oh,
because we have it until standard 6. And I mean, what we've been taught about the history of the Afrikaner was completely a lie. It was just completely a lie. We've been taught all the wrong things. And I like history, but history you can teach yourself. And
yes.
Science is difficult. I'm trying to teach myself science these days. I absolutely believe the mother science is theoretical physics. So I try to teach myself. But those things you need to be taught. But history you can read yourself. Everything that I do, I refer back to history. When I talk about the railways, I've researched it back to 1875 in South Africa. And I can talk about everything that happened since then. And now history is extremely important. We learn so much from history. You're right.
But as you say, it should be history as the story of humans living together on the planet, not the type. I mean, I grew up in the 80s, so I matriculated in 1990. I'm about 10 years younger than you are, I think.
You matriculated when?
1990.
Oh, yeah, no, you're like hundreds of years younger than me.
Oh, really?
I think I'm 74. I turn 57 one of these days.
Oh.
Not 57, 67. 67. No, history is critically important. You're right.
No, at 74, you really have to begin to slow down. You shouldn't work as hard as you're doing at 74 because you need your rest. So I've been preaching to you now, keep working, but not as hard as you're doing. And we have about roughly 10 minutes of our hour remaining. I want, in the last 10 minutes, I want you to talk to us about your miniature railway station that I've seen videos on Facebook. Do you have anything? Do you have photos? Do you have videos that you can share with our viewers? As we speak now, you don't have anything. I should have told you to have something close at hand because I've seen those videos. Tell us about that station. Tell us about how long you've been working on it. Don't tell me how much it costs, because I think I'll just be green with envy. But
I think it's running towards about 800,000 rand now.
Okay, okay. But tell us.
But that's true. It is a living, working thing. That's very important to me. It's 6 by 5 meters. It's double story.
To our viewers, I just want to say, our viewers have not seen it. How big is it? The in square meters, the
6
surface?
By 30. It's about 30.
30 square meters. So when can I
At
come
level.
and visit you? So can I come and visit you? Do I have to buy a ticket for your to see it?
It's got about 40 digitally controlled locomotives from a central station. It's a free rail system. It works in alternative current. There's about 5 or 6 stations there. But it illustrates, actually, it's got passenger stuff and so on. It's got a heritage station with heritage steam operation. But it also illustrates what's missing in this country. From time to time, I put some of those videos on LinkedIn, and sometimes I'll have up to 200 comments. because there's various types of intermodal, various ways of getting trucks from road to rail. All of those things are in there, various shunting yards, a gantry crane, the whole story to illustrate what actually should happen. These locomotives are fantastic. I mean, you can record your own voice, it makes station announcements, make 20 different sounds. You're going to press a button, and then you can program the whole thing. You can program a train and more than one, or up to 40 trains to operate independently. I can sit here where I'm sitting at the moment at my desk working, and that 6x5 meter layout is there. Got interior lighting, everything that you can think of. It is a scene between Germany and Switzerland. So it's mostly Swiss trains with some German trains. So it imagines a border town in Switzerland close to Germany, and everything is lifelike to that T. So it's German locomotives, German everything. But Märklin is the best train system in the world. Very, very expensive. A locomotive can cost 15,000 Rand.
This is now a miniature locomotive that we talk about.
Miniature locomotive, yeah. A big one.
How big are they? Okay, so this is my cell phone compared to my cell phone. Bigger, smaller.
A locomotive, like for instance, a model, and I'll talk about it just now, of the Flying Scot, will probably be as long as 2.5 cell phones, like this, and maybe slightly higher, like this. So but it can cost so much. So I say I stick to the theme. But Märklin is bringing out the model of a Flying Scot. It's going to cost about 600 British pounds. And I can't wait because they've sent out the flyers of that. And then I'm just going to put it on my layout and say it's a visiting locomotive from the UK. I've been on trains with the Flying Scot in front, and I'm mad about steam locomotives. The Red Devil in South Africa, fantastic, iconic steam locomotive. And then obviously the British do very, very well with heritage steam. I've been to many of there was one, I now forgot the name, somewhere in the southwest of Britain. There's this massive system with many stations, a whole heritage. It's not a heritage line, it's a whole heritage railway that they've set up. There's quite a few of them in the UK, and they do it very, very well. I think that is, I enjoy it. I enjoy playing with it. I'm mad about railways. I call myself a rail evangelist. And in South Africa, yeah, when the media wants to know something about rail, they often call me. They call me because I understand rail economics very well as well. But it's a big, big, big part of my life. Therefore, I have to have this layout. And I had somebody from Pretoria helping me building it.
I was following the process of your building it. So Jan is located in Eiserfontein, which is a picturesque town on the west coast. How far is it from Cape Town?
About 70 km.
70 kilometers. And it's a lovely drive out from Cape Town to Eiserfontein. It's we going into the flower time when the spring flowers. It's also
they're out right now, eh? They came out about 2 weeks ago. Yes.
Well, I'm fortunate enough to live in Worcester. We don't have to go to Namaqualand to see the flowers. If you travel along the N1, it's just beautiful scenes of flowers. But Jan, for our maybe British viewers and our American viewers and our overseas viewers, what is your opinion of the current state of British rail, without being too politically correct or incorrect, number one? And secondly, do you think that railways is better for the environment than using cars?
Yeah, we have very specific models. So we can work out for the whole country what is the possible savings if you do everything correctly, because not all freight can go to road. In South Africa, we can reduce kilometers of trucks on the road by 45% by doing things correctly. The UK and Europe is difficult because the distances are very small. But I've got a very specific example. You know Cape Town and Johannesburg, they're 1,400 kilometers apart. We have 40 million tons of freight on the road on that distance. Now in the UK, 1,400 kilometers is the distance between Land's End and John O'Groats. So if I ask the people in the UK and say, you have to move 40 million tons of stuff every year between Land's End and John O'Groats, what will you do? Oh, we'll put it on rail. Nobody's going to lorry that for 1,400 kilometers, kill our country. Say, what if you haven't got a rail? We'll just build one. Obviously, we will. And that's how stupid we are in this country that we need to fix. 1,400 kilometers, to give an idea, and we often don't understand that. If you go from Rotterdam to Warsaw in Poland, you've not done 1,400 kilometers. The distance between Cape Town and Johannesburg is 140 kilometers further than Rotterdam to Warsaw. That's how stupid we are. So Europe has done a lot to actually use rail, even for very short distances. There's very good case studies. But I think the beaching cuts that some people will know about, there's a guy that did a huge amount of research in the UK. He cut the rail network of the UK a lot. People are a little bit upset about that today. I not so much, because I cycle in those old railway beds. It's fantastic what they've done there. They have the cycle routes that more or less connects the whole country. So I've done the cycle from Bath to from Bristol to Pill and Bristol to Bath and so on along those things. They neatly kept together, cleaned all the time. And the UK knows how to work with railways. The vertical separation that they've done, that is creating a track operating company, and then separate railway companies, did not go according to plan. A lot of things went wrong there. So railway strategy in the UK over the last 20 years is very problematic. There's a lot of things that needs to be fixed. And the problem with the UK, though, if you compare it to other countries in the developing world, is no central planning. I've met people from the central planning office. They work with the 200 big projects in the UK, which one has a lot of discussion, which is the high-speed train between London and Manchester. But in fact, a very small borough in the UK can stop everything. Power is highly decentralized. And if me and my mates don't like something, I know that in Bristol, they have this hospital in Bristol, Southmead, and they wanted to expand this hospital, and there was 3 trees in the way. Now, I agree. I love trees, but one of the trees stopped it all. They had to get 3 doctors in and scientists from all over the country. They came and inspected these trees, which was hundreds of years old, given. And yes. One of the 3, and 2 of the trees, they said, no, they're going to die anyway. But the 1 tree. And then it stopped a lot of development because of 1 single tree. I like the idea, but I'm just saying you don't have central planning, really. So that makes it, people are very powerful on a local level in the UK, which is in a certain sense good. But in the developing world, we do need central planning. We see that in India, places like that. It works better. It just works better in that. But the UK, I think the strikes are stupid. I think that the railway people are paid a lot. So I like the idea that people are pushing back. They shouldn't strike. I don't think so. I think I've lived through strikes, railway strikes in the UK. I mean, since the last 25 years, I go there twice a year. It's just during COVID I didn't. I love going to Bristol. I like the UK. Me and my wife are going to tour Scotland next month. And I want to go all the way. Yeah, we're going to go all the way to Kirkwall, because I want to go and visit a place where the best whiskey in the world is made.
Island Park.
Island Park. It's in Kirkwall in the Orkney Island. So I love the UK. It's a wonderful place, but it is a little bit different from Europe. If you travel from the UK, like I did now, a few weeks ago, I spent some time there, and then I go to the Netherlands. I have to say, some things do get better. I hope my UK viewers are not, the UK people watching this is not cross with me. But there's some problems in the UK at the moment. All sorts of problems. People are suffering because of this.
All sorts of problems. Jan, we're running on to 58 minutes and 43 seconds. And I promised you that you'd be let go at 6 so that you can fulfill your obligations to join your neighbors in the pre-rugby party. And as I said at the beginning, priorities are important. One has to stick to priorities, and one has to do the right thing at the right time. And in this case, it means saying goodbye. I'm very curious about how a conversation between John and yourself would have gone. Maybe with a little bit of luck, we can pull this off again, and perhaps John can join us if the railroad workers weren't on strike, you know, those people that do the railways. I think there's a lot more to unpack in terms of climate effects of transport, because the fact is we live in a globalized world and these things have an impact on all of us, whether we realize it or not. And it's people in the background who can have an impact on how you and I live our lives, whether we're based in India, in beautiful Worcester in the Western Cape, or in Pontefract, Yorkshire, Bristol, doesn't matter. We are all connected. And I think logistics, I know nothing about logistics, except that in my reading of history, I know that logistics can have an impact on who wins a battle, who wins a war, and the other way around also. What people decide to do in terms of who they fight, when they fight, how they fight, can have a direct impact on me sitting in South Africa when Vladimir Putin decides to invade Ukraine. And in that respect, I think logistics is quite a philosophical field of study based in real world numbers. And I would love to have another conversation with Jan when when John Richards is with us. How many times I've done that? I'm just
maybe one day he can introduce me to Alice Roberts. That will be a dream fulfilled.
John, did you hear that? And Dr. Alice Roberts, and well, John does know some people. He knows
just 3 minutes.
He knows Lawrence Krauss. He's actually met Richard Dawkins. We have had conversations with people like Dan Barker. John also has had events with famous philosophers of whom the name is now escaping me. So let me just say at this point, Jan, it was a pleasure to have you. And I think I'll definitely go and visit your railway in your basement and see what a 74-year-old playing with trains looks like. And thank you so much for your insights. Thank you also for the work that you do for South Africans. From Uganda for me. And if you're ever in this space, please pop around and come and visit and bring your boss from the World Bank with you, because I'm sure that would be a fantastic conversation to have. And on that note, wherever you are, stay well. Good night, good morning, good afternoon. Thank you so much.
Thank you.